doesn't. Okay. So it is 4:15 on June 15th, 2020. For attending members, I have Saran Pine, Freeman Zausner, and Susan, and I'm sorry, if I mess up the name, Susan Swed?
Yeah, real easy. Just ignore the Z.
Susan Swed.
Yeah.
All right. So Saran, Freeman, and Susan Swed. And we have Mike Thayer as a guest today. And I'm here as the recorder and minutes keeper. So we have Ted Worcester and Renee Grover who are absent at this time. We did try to reach out and could not get them. For the agenda items, I'll now leave it to Saran to start things off.
Thank you. So I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Max, but I don't think we have any minutes to review from the previous meeting.
I do not have any minutes to review right now.
That's right. We can get to that eventually. At our next meeting, we can review those and review whatever transpires at this meeting. So really the only thing on the agenda that I have today is to talk with Mike and possibly ask you to come back, Mike, so that we, but basically to educate us on the kinds of processes that are used for cultivation of marijuana and processing marijuana. Are there any contaminants that get put into groundwater or septic systems we're concerned with the medical marijuana caregivers who grow marijuana on their property or at a site, and then who somehow process that. And I don't understand that. I don't understand what they're using.
Okay, well, again, I'm not a drug user. I don't know much about growing marijuana, but as I started to say, I think it's pretty straightforward. It's a very robust plant, and it doesn't require a lot of herbicides or pesticides. And I imagine you need to water it during droughts, but I think it's a pretty sturdy type plant that's hard to keep down. And the basic processing of marijuana itself is just drying it and sort of fluffing out the leaves and getting out the seeds and stems and twigs, because they're a problem to smoke. Where the chemicals might be used, and again, I'm not experienced with this, that the cannabis oil, if you're separating cannabis oil from the plants, it can be done by a technique called solvent extraction. And I don't know what solvents they would use, but a lot of solvents do have environmental problems. That's one of the problems at the Sylvania site. They were using chlorinated solvents, but there are other solvents, even gasoline, unleaded gasoline could be a solvent. Benzene, a known carcinogen, can be used as a solvent. If there is somebody who's an amateur who doesn't know which solvent to use, he might be exposing him or herself to fairly high dosage of pretty nasty chemicals. What they would do with the spent solvent, me as a chemist, I'd call Clean Harbors if I was using drums of it, or another hazardous waste disposal firm. If this is a shoestring operation, they could do what happened at Sylvania. They could just dump it on the ground, and you'd have a solvent plume beginning to be generated, which could impact groundwater.
Would you, Mike, would you know, if there are any state regulations as to the processing of marijuana for the caregivers?
I suspect not. I think the state government would pretty rapidly run afoul of the federal government if they did that, because it's still federally illegal. So having a state-run laboratory or a state-run procedures to make hash oil, yeah, I haven't studied the issue, but I'd be amazed if there were any state regulations on processing hash oil or guidance documents, anything like that.
So is the medical marijuana processed differently than the recreational?
There's no difference. The material that they sell as medical marijuana is marijuana.
Okay.
There's nothing medical about it. It's just the end use is what has given medical marijuana its name.
Okay. My understanding was that they press the oil out of it with a press, and you're saying they take it out with a solvent?
Hash oil, I think, is taken out with a solvent. CBD oil,
Yeah.
which has very little, is pressed.
Okay. It has very little what? I'm sorry. You said CBD oil that has very little is
Oh,
pressed.
very little tetrahydrocannabinol, the active ingredient in
Okay.
marijuana. Has very little psychoactive ingredients.
Okay.
But hash oil is full of it. It's concentrated.
Right.
Dihydro.
So we're just dealing with the medical part. Yeah. Okay. I know. You just
It's
said
a
it's no
misnomer.
difference.
Medical marijuana is no different than the marijuana that you buy on the street or down at Highbrow. It may be more thoroughly standardized. They may know a little bit more about how much marijuana is in a particular batch. They may have had it analyzed for that, but it's no different. There's no difference between medical marijuana and street marijuana. It was legal to use marijuana medically, and so it became medical marijuana.
Right.
But technically, chemically, it's no different.
Okay.
Freeman, did you have questions?
Yeah, are these solvents flammable?
Most of them are. I suppose you could use carbon tetrachloride, but that's really hard to get now. If you bought carbon tet, the EPA would probably be knocking on your door. Yeah, a lot of oils that are used in cooking, like soybean oil or cottonseed oil, they're done with solvent extraction, and they use a benign chemical called hexane to do that. But you can't run down to the store and get some hexane, but you can go down and get, you can go to the gas station and get gasoline. And yeah, most of them are flammable.
And
Hexane,
because
flammable.
we were concerned when one of Saran's earlier meetings, we had talked about, for example, how much electricity they use and whether or not their panels were rated for the amperage they need. And then this life safety, and the question is the storage of these materials, not just the use of the materials, but even the storage seems to me that they could be potentially flammable. Let's say if there was a fire and these caught fire, it seemed to me that would be fairly ignitable. That's a question.
They're about as flammable as gasoline. And gasoline is as good an example as I can think of. With regard to electricity, if they're growing marijuana indoors, they use an awful lot of juice. They use a lot of electricity.
And we had, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and in fact, even our conversations when Renee was present, we were all talking about, and she in particular was talking about the amount and the guidelines that we might need for safety features in a residence that did use. I don't remember the amount of electricity she said she was using, but she did tell us it was extensive. Seemed like a lot.
She had a 400 amp service.
Okay, thank you.
400 amp service will run a lot of grow lights. If they're only growing a dozen plants or so, they'll be using even on 120 volts, I can't imagine that they'd be using more than 500 watts, which would be 5 amps. I can't imagine that they'd be using more than 4 or 5 amps.
She was using 400.
That was her service.
400 watt bulbs?
That
Or
was her
400
service.
Her,
400
well, that's
service per house.
the service into someone's house is the total capacity that the house is capable of taking.
Understood.
Okay. The amount you use is dependent on the number of lights you're burning. And, you know, a high pressure, not high pressure sodium, what is it? A metal halide bulb, they're standardized about 400 watts. And at 120 volts, 400 watts is 3.5 amps or so. It's not a lot at all. A single 400 watt bulb could probably grow, you know, a dozen plants or so. Now, if this is a larger scale operation, which I'm not sure is actually the case, I thought that the law said you could grow 8 or 10 or whatever, a dozen plants yourself and not run afoul of the law. But if they're doing, you know, like farm scale, then you could run into lots and lots of watts and amps. But
Well,
for a homeowner,
We're not addressing personal use. Our
Okay.
committee is addressing use, but or providing by the caregivers themselves. So they're medical marijuana caregivers. People can go to their house and with a prescription and acquire some product. So it's those caregivers that are providing product.
So they're not doing any growing then?
Well, no, I don't know that.
No, they are.
They are, yeah.
And they grow per number of patient, and the number of patients they have has increased under the law. It's no longer limited to 5. So they can have many more patients than they used to have.
Well, there's a simple solution to this problem. If people want to grow marijuana on more than just a personal scale, all you have to do is say that the electrical service has to meet the requirements of the National Electrical Code. And then you could have a building inspector go in and say, I've added up the number of appliances, the number of high pressure sodium lamps you have here, or metal halide lamps that you have here. Add them up, and it's a simple calculation to determine whether they're overloading the circuit breakers or not. That would be really easy to codify into a law. Just say that if you grow marijuana, your grow lights have to conform to the National Electrical Code. If that was the purpose of this committee, that would be to develop some sort of regulations on medical marijuana or the growing of marijuana indoors. Then you would just say, make it conform to the National Electrical Code. It's almost redundant. They have to do it. And if they don't, then the building inspector could tag the building and basically evict them. That's true of any business. You know, if you're not up to code, guess what? You get shut down or get a notice of violation or fines or whatever.
Yeah, if I can just jump in on that. Just quickly looking at the land use ordinance, that is a standard that's required for every new business, that they must follow the 2002 National Electric Code. I assume that's the one you're talking about.
That's the one.
Yep.
And so when we have a new business in town, Max, do they report to the town that they're a new business and they're up and running?
Are you talking about a brand new business that's just building a new building from scratch, or are you talking about anyone who just wants to do a new business?
Anyone who just wants to do a business in their home.
Yeah, Stan and I usually get calls from everyone, and for home occupations, it's usually people who just have basic just a basic office sometimes, where it's not like the personal office. It's more of I'm working from home 5 days a week, and I'm here most of the time. I will travel a bit, but this is where my main work is. Those people will always report. There are some people who just don't, and we then follow up with them once we do find them.
So is there a penalty if they don't report?
There is an after the fact penalty. It's usually it's double the fee. But I think we've now changed it. If it's a building related one, I think we've changed it now 3 times. And if it's in the shoreline, that's 5. That's for constructing new buildings.
Yeah, that's different. Yeah.
It would still be twice the fee if it's an after the fact, just for changing.
Does the town regulate the businesses, the medical marijuana businesses, as far as giving them a license?
No. That was something that we discussed, I think, in December with Stan Waltz. Because I think we were looking at the Augusta regulations, and that was brought up, and that was such a huge topic. We wanted to talk about it at a different meeting with Stan, because he has been working with Damerscott on theirs. But that's just talking about stores and special cultivation facilities. I don't think there's been that much licensing talked about for home caregivers or domicile.
But we do have quite a few in Waldeboro. I think it's 18.
Yes. Home caregivers, there are 18, I believe, is the last count.
Right.
That seems like an awful high number of caregivers, plus a retail outlet for recreational marijuana. Are any of these people making any money at this?
Well,
We do not have
recreational.
we've no recreational in Waldeboro.
I thought Highborough was recreational.
No, they're
No.
medical.
They're medical.
They were approved as medical. So if
Okay.
someone ever found them, and I think I even talked to them a while ago, and they said, no, we're medical. We want to be recreational and wherever we can, but we know that Waldeboro's only medical. So
Okay. I'd like to expand upon something I said earlier about the processing of marijuana. Again, marijuana is very easy to grow, no special techniques. If you're going to use a lot of it, you may want to use a heat dryer as opposed to just letting it air dry or dry in the sun, for example. I'm trying to think of how that might be regulated.
If you don't mind, I'm going to interrupt you. You said there are no special techniques. My understanding was that the marijuana plant is extremely susceptible to mold, and they actually have to watch it constantly, because if any mold enters the facility they have it in, the whole crop can go kaput really quickly. I don't have experience. I just had heard this.
Well, there's 2 types of mold. I'm a gardener, so I can tell you there's 2 types of mold that occur. One is while the plants are growing, and that would be caused by excessively rainy weather or overwatering. If you watered the foliage instead of watering the roots, you could get mold. And I don't know whether marijuana is susceptible to that or not. If it was, there are tons and tons of mold remedies. Captan is a sulfur-containing compound that's commonly used on vegetables to control mold while they're growing. And even just ordinary sulfur itself, flowers of sulfur, it's a yellowish powder, it's pure sulfur. That's often used to control mold. When I think of a mold-susceptible plant, I think of squash, summer squash in particular, and zucchini. They all get powdery mildew, which is a form of mold. And anybody who's grown them sees their plants wilt pretty quickly during late August. The other type of mold is more problematic. If you harvest any plant matter and you don't dry it before you store it, it's a recipe to get mold. If you see all those big hay bales out in the fields these days, they're all covered with white plastic.
Mhm.
My grandson called them giant marshmallows.
Call them what?
The giant marshmallows.
Oh, yeah.
You know those giant hay bales that are out
Yeah.
in the fields? The reason why they're enclosed in plastic is to keep them dry.
Mhm.
Once organic matter like hay or like marijuana if it's kept damp, mold grows on it like crazy. So if you're careless and you harvest your marijuana and throw it in a big pile in the basement where it's doesn't dry and it's damp, that's going to get moldy, just like
Yeah.
almost anything else.
Well-
Mildew grows everywhere.
What I had heard about was the while it's growing kind of mold. And this is why marijuana growers hold themselves out to be sort of experts, because they're constantly on top of the mold, because it can whip right through the crop.
You know,
Like,
if you can send me,
now this is
send
probably
me
inside business. This would be inside business. I don't know if people grow marijuana around here outside during the summer, but I would think they might.
Yeah. Well, there are lots of fungicides that would take care of mold, and just off the top of my head, Captan is a very common one. You can go down to Home Depot and buy it, or Moose Crossing Garden Center.
Now, those aren't, that's not an organic product, is it?
Captan?
Yeah,
Well, in one sense it is, and in another sense it is not. Organic chemistry is the chemistry of carbon,
Right.
and petrochemicals are technically organic chemicals according to the scientific sense, but in the agricultural sense, they're not organic.
well, see, I'm
know-
thinking that a lot of these marijuana growers and their clients are really interested in having organic, organically grown stuff.
I would not regard it that way. Captan is a synthetic organic chemical. It's
Yeah.
not a, for lack of a better term, a touchy-feely organic chemical or organic product. It's organic is a word with two diametrically opposite meanings.
I know,
when
I
you
get it.
right down to it. But in the usage you're using, I would say that Captan is probably not considered organic, although I suspect sulfur probably is, because that does occur naturally.
Right.
Yes. But there are treatments to control mold on growing plants.
Okay.
Can you send me a link? Do you have a link to a website on this?
I can get it for you.
That would be great.
Okay.
I'm talking from, admittedly, a lack of knowledge about the
And I'm
subject.
talking with a quarter of an ounce of knowledge. Okay. And can I get your email at some point?
Oh, sure. It's it should be on the distribution list. It's sludgy.
Okay, that's fine. I'll look in that.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Freeman, did you have any other questions?
No, I think this has been very informative. I've learned a bunch that I hadn't thought about.
Well, I think that we need to meet again with Mike and hopefully be more successful in getting Renee to join us so that we can have a better understanding of the process that she goes through in order to create a product that she provides to people.
Agreed.
So
But let me ask you, as a new person here,
Yes.
are you trying to formulate an ordinance for a very small grower? Or what if a huge grower moved into Waldeboro?
Well, there cannot be, I don't believe, a huge grower, because not only does our ordinance prohibit recreational sales, but I believe it also prohibits commercial growing. Max could tell me if I'm right or wrong. So, so there cannot be on a large scale, although because the state laws have changed recently, we might have some, I think we might,
Tobacco growers in here.
no, we might have to look at the, how those two areas mesh in terms of large commercial scale, whereas as opposed to having a medical marijuana provider who is providing on a large scale. Maybe Max can address that for us.
What I can say is, in terms of growing, it's connected to the state's law. I remember I've had to ask this a few times. The Maine Municipal Association, where the home caregiver is tied to that. So we can't prohibit someone who's a home caregiver, and we can't prohibit how they grow it either, because it kind of goes hand in hand.
Right.
In terms of the large scale growing, just as Saran said, it can't really be done unless we have that in the ordinance, because they would be this non-domicile facility. So those store, for example, Highbrow, the one at the top of the hill, they are exempt because they were approved at the time. As long as they're growing only for themselves, and their caregiver operation, that's fine. But I've already had to tell 2 or 3 people already who wanted to grow commercially for medical reasons, that's not allowed because we don't allow that type of facility. And they've wanted to do it in different parts of town. And I said, no, until we've changed the ordinance to do that.
It's a good point. They're only allowed to do it if it's in their own home.
Correct. That's all I had. I'm going to,
If the growing is in their own home,
Right.
right, Freeman?
For me,
Is that what you
right.
mean?
Right, for their own patients.
Right.
But your broader question is, what is our goal? We're not allowed to restrict medical marijuana caregivers. So our goal as a committee, having first made only one definitive vote, which had to do with dispensaries and land use, is to have reasonable regulations for their operation consistent with Maine law. That might include setbacks from churches, schools, things like that. And we can send you some of the things we had talked about or thought about. And then the second ones with things like maybe advertising, life safety, things like that would be reasonable, and perhaps registration with a fee that might be $50 to $100.
Okay.
Safety and water quality and disposal were the 3 things that I'm really concerned about. Safety, not just for the growers, but also for the people who go onto someone's property in order to acquire the product or buy the product. So.
Yeah, there are always residues from any business, when any manufacturing or whatever. Are there any specific residues that are of concern? Again, I don't see in the growing or drying of it, I don't see it there being a problem. But if they're making hash oil and they're using solvents, that could be a disposal problem.
Okay.
But the agricultural residues, if you don't like the twigs and seeds or whatever, you can just throw them in the compost pile and they'll decompose naturally. Of course, they're not going to have a compost pile. They'll just throw it in the trash and it'll go to the transfer station eventually.
Yep. Right. So, does anybody have anything else?
I guess I do have one question, but it's more general. Can committee members be forced to show up at a committee meeting?
No.
By subpoena?
No,
Sorry?
by subpoena.
Yeah,
No. In fact, the town has a general rule, I think, that
Right.
if you miss 3 meetings in a row, then you could be
Yeah,
asked to leave.
if you leave, if you are not present for 3 meetings in one of the years, then the committee can vote to have you kicked off. But that's really something we haven't done forcefully
Sure.
on this.
and not that I'm suggesting it. It's just, how many times can I be absent? No.
3
3 for a whole year?
No, it's all right.
fiscal year. We don't really. It's a rule that's really not enforced unless we know members aren't coming here because of whatever reason they're trying to pull.
Intentionally? Okay.
Right. As long as you're not intentionally missing these meetings, it's fine. I mean, it's summer right now. People tend to go on vacation. I don't know what's going to be like this year. People get
This
sick.
is vacation land.
Fair point.
So I move that we adjourn.
Seconded.
Okay. So all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All
Aye.
right. All opposed? I think we're adjourned. And so our next meeting will be the 3rd Monday in July.
That
And
I have as the 20th.
yep, and I will make a concerted effort to be sure that, Mike, I hope you can attend, and I will make a concerted effort to be sure that everybody is there. I mean, it would be very helpful for Ted Worcester, who's our other absent member. And maybe by then we could also do a draft ordinance, just circulate that.
Well,
to talk.
doesn't have to be an ordinance. We just need to get to the recommendations at least for what we want to do for the select
right.
board.
Yep, right. And knowing that there would be some holes in that need to be filled in terms of environmental.
Because the recommendations may not even be creating this brand new ordinance. It could just be updating what we currently have or something like that.
Okay. Thank you.
That can be discussed more later. And I will make sure to actually have minutes next time.
Okay.
Hopefully have a lot more done. Once the election's over, I shouldn't have so much on my plate. So that should be fine at that point.
Yeah, that'd be great. Okay.
All right, it was my pleasure. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
And I'll send you that link.
I
Okay.
appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.